Hi, how we doing tonight, YouTube? Anyway, so by now we've probably all seen the Axios interview where Trump just basically says that 150,000 people dead is what it is, right? I mean, for real, you'd think that that man would just learn how to keep his mouth shut. Who in their right mind is still okay with people talking like that? Then we kick off my Facebook adventures today with some morons essentially saying that the vaccine is just something that they're not going to bother to do. Never mind the choir of folks behind them saying that they don't trust the flu vaccine either because, hey, why not just use this opportunity to spout a bunch of nonsense around, I don't know, conspiracy theories and anti-vax and poison and, phase 3. It's like, shut the... Anyway. Hi. Chapter 8, Escape Velocity. This is going to be another one that I split up into multiple parts, guys, so just be prepared for that. My Kindle here is saying there's 51 minutes left in the chapter. I don't think it's going to be that long, but that's at least a couple of different sessions, and I've only got about 15 minutes tonight, so fair warning. All right, well, let's dig in and get started. I sat at the dining room table with the shoe in front of me, trying to figure out what the point of it was. I had looked through the remaining boxes under the tree, thinking that perhaps the shoe's twin had been wrapped separately, but no, there was just the one, a gold lame shoe with a 4-inch heel filled with hard candy. Both the individual candies and the shoe itself were wrapped in cellophane. Where had this thing come from? I wondered. Had it been a door prize or a party favor from a luncheon? Donald came through the pantry from the kitchen. As he passed me, he asked, "What's that?" "It's a present from you." "Really?" He looked at it for a second. "Ivana!" he shouted into the foyer. She was standing on the other side of the Christmas tree near the living room. "Ivana!" "What is it, Donald?" "This is great." He pointed at the shoe and she smiled. Maybe he thought it was real gold. It had all started in 1977 with a 3-pack of Bloomie's underwear, retail $12. My very first Christmas present from Donald and his new wife, Ivana. That same year, they had given Fritz a leather-bound journal. It looked as though it were meant for somebody older, but it was really nice, and I felt a bit slighted until I realized that it was at least 2 years out of date. At least the underwear wouldn't expire. On holidays, Donald and Ivana pulled up to the house in either an expensive sports car or a chauffeur-driven limo that was even longer than my grandfather's. They swept into the foyer like socialites. Ivana in her furs and silk and outrageous hair and makeup. Donald in his expensive 3-piece suit and shiny shoes. Everybody else looking conservative and unfashionable by comparison. I grew up thinking that Donald had struck out on his own and single-handedly built the business that had turned my family name into a brand, and that my grandfather, provincial and miserly, cared only about making and keeping money. On both counts, the truth was vastly different. A New York Times article published on October 2nd, 2018, that uncovered the vast amounts of alleged fraud and quasi-legal and illegal activities my family had engaged in over the course of several decades included this paragraph. Fred Trump and his companies also began extending large loans and lines of credit to Donald Trump. Those loans dwarfed what the other Trumps got. The flow was so constant at times that it was as if Donald Trump had his own money store. Consider 1979, when he borrowed $1.5 million in January, $65,000 in February, $122,000 in March, $150,000 in April, $192,000 in May, $226,000 in June, $2.4 million in July, and $40,000 in August, according to records filed with New Jersey casino regulators. In 1976, when Roy Cohn suggested that Donald and Ivana sign a prenuptial agreement, the terms set for Ivana's compensation were based on Fred's wealth, because at the time Donald's father was his only source of income. I heard from my grandmother that, in addition to alimony and child support, as well as the condo, the prenup, at Ivana's insistence, included a rainy day fund of $150,000. My parents' divorce agreement had also been based on my grandfather's wealth, but Ivana's $150,000 bonus was worth almost 21 years of $600 a month payments my mother received for child support and alimony. Before Ivana, there had always been a sameness to the holiday that made them blurred together. Christmas when I was 5 was indistinguishable from Christmas when I was 11. The routine never varied. We'd enter the house through the front door at 1 p.m. Dozens of packages in tow, handshakes, and air kisses all around, then gather in the living room for shrimp cocktail. Like the front door, we used the living room only twice a year. Dad came and went, but I have no recollection of his being there one way or another. Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners were identical, although one Christmas Gam had temerity to make roast beef instead of turkey. It was a meal everybody liked, but Donald and Robert were pissed off. Gam spent the whole meal with her head bowed, hands in her lap. Just when you thought the subject was dropped for good, one of them would say some version of, "Jesus, Mom, I can't believe you didn't make turkey." Get up. Leave my table if you have such a frickin' problem with my cooking. Once Ivana became a part of the family, she joined Donald at the power center of the table, where he sat at my grandfather's right hand, his only equal. The people nearest to them, Mary Ann and Robert and Ivana, formed a claque with one mission: to prop Donald up, follow his lead in conversation, and defer to him as though nobody was as important as he was. I think that initially it was simply an expedient. Mary Ann and Robert had learned early on that there was no point in contradicting their father's obvious preference. "I never challenged my father," Mary Ann said, "ever. It was easier to go along for the ride." Donald's chiefs of staff are prime examples of this phenomenon. John Kelly, at least for a while, and Mick Mulvaney, without any reservations at all, would behave the same way until they were ousted for not being sufficiently loyal. That's how it always works with the Sificans. First, they remain silent, no matter what outrages are committed. Then they make themselves complicit by not acting. Ultimately, they find they are expendable when Donald needed a scapegoat. Over time, the discrepancy between Fred's treatment of Donald and his other children became painfully clear. It was simpler for Rob and Mary Ann to toe the party line in the hope that they wouldn't get treated any worse, which seems to be the same calculations Republicans in Congress make every day now. They also knew what had happened to my father when he failed to meet Fred's expectations. The rest of us, at the other end of the table, were superfluous. Our job was to fill the cheap seats. A year after the gold lame shoe, the gift basket I received from Donald and Ivana hit the trifecta. It was an obvious regift. It was useless, and it demonstrated Ivana's panache for cellophane. After unwrapping it, I noticed among the tin of gourmet sardines. Who the hell gives gourmet sardines? I mean, they're delicious. Sardines are delicious. But, and this is very important, I would never, ever, ever give sardines as a present to anybody. That's insanity. The box of table water crackers, the jar of vermouth-packed olives, and a salami, a circular indentation in the tissue paper that filled the bottom of the basket where another jar had once been. My cousin David walked by, pointing at the empty space, and asked, "What was that?" "I've no idea. Something that goes with these, I guess," I said, holding up the box of crackers. "Probably caviar," he said, laughing. I shrugged, having no idea what caviar was. I grabbed the basket handle and walked toward the pile of presents I had stacked next to the stairs. I passed Ivana and my grandmother on the way, lifted the basket and said, "Thanks, Ivana," and put it on the floor. "Is that yours?" At first I thought she was talking about the gift basket, but she was referring to the copy of Omni magazine that was sitting on top of the stack of gifts I'd already opened. Omni, a magazine of science and science fiction that had launched in October of that year, was my new obsession. I had just picked up the December issue and brought it with me to the house in the hopes that between shrimp cocktail and dinner, I'd have a chance to finish reading it. Oh yeah, Bob, the publisher, is a friend of mine. No way, I love this magazine. I'll introduce you. You'll come into the city and meet him. It wasn't quite as seismic as being told I was going to meet Isaac Asimov, but it was pretty close. Wow, thanks. I filled a plate and went upstairs to my dad's room, where he'd been all day too sick to join us. He was sitting up, listening to his portable radio. I handed the plate to him, but he put it on the small bedside table, not interested. I told him about Ivana's generous offer. Wait a second. Who does she want to introduce you to? I would never forget the name. I looked at the magazine's masthead right after speaking to Ivana, and there it was. Bob Guccione, publisher. You're going to meet the guy who publishes Penthouse? Even at 13, I knew what Penthouse was. There was no way we could be talking about the same person. Dad chuckled and said, I don't think that's such a good idea, and all of a sudden, neither did I. It was impossible to laugh about the presents my mother received. Why she was still expected to attend family holidays years after her divorce from my father was a mystery, but why she went was an even bigger mystery. Clearly, the Trumps didn't want her there any more than she wanted to be there. Some of the presents they gave her were nice enough, but they always came from lesser stores than the gifts for Ivana and Robert's wife, Blaine. Worse, many of them had clearly been regifted. A handbag she got from Ivana one year bore a luxury brand but contained a used Kleenex. Ew. After dinner and the opening of presents, we split up. Some of us went to the kitchen, some of us to the backyard, and the rest of us to the library, where I sat on the floor near the door with my legs crossed. From a distance, I watched whatever Godzilla movie or football game Donald and Rob happened to be watching. After a while, I noticed my mother wasn't around. I didn't worry at first, but when she didn't return, I went to look for her. I checked the kitchen, but found only my grandmother and aunts. I went out to the backyard where my brother and David were throwing a football around, and when I asked Fritz where she was, he said, I have no idea, clearly not interested. With time, I would know where to find her without needing to ask, but the first few times I felt panic. Mom was in the dining room, sitting alone at the table. By then, the sideboard had been cleared, and the only evidence of the meal was a few stray cloth napkins on the floor. I stood in the doorway, hoping she would notice me and that my presence would set her back into motion. I was afraid to say anything, not wanting to disturb her. While the clatter of dishes and talk about leftovers and ice cream cake filtered out from the kitchen, I approached the mahogany table in the fading afternoon light. The chandelier had been extinguished, but I wished it had been even darker so that I didn't have to see my mother's face and how stricken it looked. Careful not to touch her, I sat in the chair next to her. There was no comfort I could give or take except in solidarity. 8 months before the gift of underwear, Donald and Ivana were married at Marble Collegiate Church and held their reception at the 21 Club. Mom, Fritz, and I were relegated to the cousins' table, and Dad wasn't there. The lie the family told was that Dad had been asked to be Donald's best man and his MC at the reception, a role Joey Bishop actually filled. But the family had decided he needed to stay in Florida in order to take care of Uncle Vic, Gam's brother-in-law. The truth was, my grandfather simply didn't want him at the wedding, and he had been told not to come. Well, that's sad. Anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to cut it today. It looks like we've got at least a few more pages to go. Yeah, this one's a long one. So let's stick with it, shall we? Any event, thank you for joining. Stay sane out there. I'm starting to miss people. So comment. Say something. Anyway, all right, guys. Stay sane. Try and avoid the news.